Donald Trump Jr. exclusively telling Fox News' Sean Hannity that the 20-minute meeting was solely for opposition research. So if it's for opposition research, how does that become a crime? We're asking right now Harvard Law Professor Emeritus Alan Dershowitz. Professor, good to have you here.
Good, thank you. Well, it becomes a crime only if Donald Trump Jr. had said to the Russians, look, we want opposition research. Why don't you hack the Democratic National Committee and commit a crime and get it? Obviously, he didn't do that. That would make it a crime. But to use opposition research, whatever its source, is the essence of democracy.
Even from the Russians, by the way. I think this is an important distinction because people could say, oh, you know, well, the Russians were offering this, and therefore that makes it illegal. That makes it treason.
Well, that's ridiculous. That's ridiculous. Treason is defined in the Constitution as only basically waging war against the United States or giving aid and comfort to an enemy. It doesn't include receiving opposition research from the Russians. You know, it's very much like the New York Times publishing the Pentagon Papers. The Times knew that it had been obtained illegally, the Pentagon Papers, but they had the right to publish it. And the Trump campaign had a right to use negative research, just as the Clinton campaign had a right to use negative research, no matter who it came from. If you take some of these critics to their logical conclusion, they would say that if some student who happened to be not an American went over to the Clinton campaign and said, we have a photograph of Donald Trump groping a woman, would you like it? And if Clinton had said yes, she'd be guilty of a crime. That's just so absurd.
You know, you say they have the right to use this information. In this particular case, they didn't even have any information. I mean, all they were doing was listening. And you're making the point they absolutely not just have a right to use information, but they have a right to gather, to listen. So long as you're not actually committing a crime, listening to what someone has to say, albeit they're from Russia, that's okay?
Of course that's okay. Of course that's protected by the First Amendment, just like if the Russians came into the New York Times and said, boy, do we have a scoop on Donald Trump. Of course the New York Times would be able to listen to it. They'd have to evaluate it. The New York Times published material by Snowden, who was a thief who stole American secrets, by Manning, who stole American secrets, by Ellsberg, who stole American secrets. And none of them was guilty of treason or anything like that, although there was some extremists who said that they were. You know, people throw around the term treason so easily, or even throw around just the term criminal law so easily. We have to distinguish between political sins and federal crimes. Look, what I think that collaborating with the Russians and accepting information from the Russians, probably not a good idea. And if we don't think it's a good idea, we're entitled to vote against the people who did it. But to turn a political sin into a federal crime is to endanger democracy. And
that's what you think those that are doing that. And I would point out, by the way, Tim Kaine, who ran for vice president with the Hillary Clinton camp, he was one of the ones out there today saying this is treason. Another example of someone calling this treason, Richard Blumenthal, the senator from Connecticut. So they're embarking on what it seems as though you're saying, Professor, dangerous territory in that they're threatening our democracy right now with throwing around terminology like these.
I agree with you. I wish that these senators who I support, I voted for them, would read the Constitution and see how treason is defined. Remember that before the American Constitution, the British used to cut off the heads of their monarchs because they committed treason. Treason was defined very broadly to mean anything against the government. So the United States Constitution defined treason very narrowly. It said treason shall consist only, and then it defines it very specifically.
By the way, Tim Kaine's a smart guy. He has a law degree, right? I mean, is this all for political purposes? I should, by the way, point out, Professor, President Trump did tell Reuters today that he had no advance knowledge of this meeting. Not that that would necessarily matter?
It would matter politically, but it wouldn't matter legally. Look, legally, if the president went and called before he was president, candidate Trump called Vladimir Putin and said, look, Vlad, I'm a deal maker. Do I have a deal for you? If you can give me negative research that you have on Hillary Clinton and help me be elected president, I'll call off the sanctions. There'd be no crime. It would be a horrible, terrible thing. It didn't happen, obviously. But for something to be a crime, you have to point to a statute. The only statute people have pointed to have been treason, which obviously is inapplicable. And the other is making campaign contributions from a foreign country. But that was supposed to cover only money. It's not covering information or facts or truth or anything like that, because that's all covered by the First Amendment.
Hey, Alan, stick with me. I want to play some sound for you from Tim Kaine from earlier. Let's roll the tape. I want your reaction on the other side.
Mm-hmm.
We're now beyond obstruction of justice in terms of what's being investigated. This is moving into perjury, false statements, and even into potentially treason.
Potentially treason.
But I wish he'd focus on perjury. You know, perjury is lying under oath. We've had no evidence that anybody has lied under oath. It is not a crime in America for a politician to lie. If it were, our jails would be filled with politicians. It's only a crime to lie to a federal law enforcement official or to lie under oath. So I wish Tim Kaine, who's a decent guy, wouldn't throw around concepts like this. We have to remember that his candidate, the one he ran with, Republicans were yelling, lock her up, she's guilty of espionage, she's guilty of treason. Yeah. I opposed it then, I oppose it now. I'm not doing this because I support the Trump policies. I'm doing this as a liberal Democrat who voted against Trump because I believe that the criminal law should be interpreted narrowly and consistently, and we shouldn't be making up crimes because we don't like the person. You know, it reminds me of Joseph Stalin sitting with Lavrenti Beria, the head of the KGB, and Beria saying, show me the man and I'll find you the crime. That's what's going on. People don't like Trump. And so they're saying, let's find a crime that we can accuse him of. But it's just not the way democracy is supposed to operate. He was elected. He will serve his term. He will not be indicted. He will not be impeached unless new information comes out. But on the basis of what we now know, he has not committed either a felony or an impeachable offense.
Well, you know, you're making some of your fellow Democrats very unhappy saying all that.
Well,
we appreciate your honesty, Professor.
Let me tell you, I'm on Martha's Vineyard where they don't permit Republicans.
Be careful. They may not let you into the restaurant soon.
Yeah.
Professor, thank you so much. Good to see you. Thank you for joining us tonight.